Welcome back to another episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. Today, our episode is all about cyberpunk related MOCs. We're going to show a fair few related MOCs that fit that theme today. But if you're new to the Bionicle Inspiration series, what is it? Well, we're a show that showcases Bionicle MOCs from across the Bionicle community to inspire you to build your own super cool stuff. So let's break open our canister, pour out the pieces, and get ready for some good old Bionicle goodness. So what's cyberpunk? You might have heard that at the start and been like, yeah, I've heard this term in passing, or it's that one video game with Keanu Reeves in it, right? Maybe you don't quite know. Let's give a little quick definition here, just so we're all on the same page. So cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction set in a dystopian, futuristic setting, and it tends to focus on kind of a combination of low life and high tech. So it'll feature advanced technology, such as like massive scientific achievements or like artificial intelligence, cybernetics, but then it contrasts that with a degree of breakdown or radical change in social order. So if you've seen movies like Blade Runner, The Matrix, Judge Dredd, Alita Battle Angel, and a whole bunch of other different movies as well, or different video games, or different books or comics, or all sorts of different things, they could be set in a cyberpunk world. And I would have been showing you a bunch of images as I said all this, so it's that sort of very interesting aesthetic. To distill it, if I was just reading off what more or less what Wikipedia said cyberpunk was for that definition there, but if you're still a little confused, think of it as certain elements of science fiction where everything's kind of pretty cool and there's been a lot of scientific advancement and change, but yet society hasn't actually really grown that much. So yes, technology has grown, but society's kind of not doing so hot. But anyway, let's show a few more MOCs if you're still a little bit confused, or you actually totally get it. Regardless, you'll understand a little more as we talk about the actual specific MOCs today. And the first one we've got, this one's by Oscar Cinderwall and it's called Ooga. And this MOC is called Laurie Johnson Elite Interceptor. So first off, just the aesthetic on this MOC is awesome. One of my favorite things with it is the click-it bracelet that's used around its face there. So of course you can see that it is using the CCBS Ray headpiece there, and there is that kind of trans blue thing around it that looks like this cool, like kind of heads-up display visor sort of thing. It's awesome. So Clickits was an older Lego theme, very similar to Dots that we have today, reasonably similar, of course. But Clickits was sort of this old Lego jewelry thing that you could get. And yeah, they had some bracelet pieces in here, and it's been used very, very well as this awesome heads-up display, which does add this really great sci-fi aesthetic to this MOC. So it's a fantastic part use, and if you're lucky enough to have any kind of Clickits pieces, or heck, maybe you want to play around with some dots, you know, those themes are pretty similar to some degree. You could use that for some sort of funky, cool heads-up display like this. Additionally, too, I mentioned that it used Ray's CCBS Star Wars Ultra Build headpiece there. Great to see that part being used because, in all honesty, it's kind of just... often those pieces can be quite difficult because they're very specific, but adding something in front of it like this and putting it in a different context, it does actually really help because it removes it from the Star Wars ideas that you already have about it, and instead it becomes something a bit more different and unique. And to some degree, I feel like some of those humanoid Star Wars figureheads, some of them are done really well, like Obi-Wan and stuff. You instantly can tell who that is. But then there's some other heads, a bit like Rey and like Poe Dameron, to name a couple. They don't quite look exactly like the original. From a certain point of view, they do, but they also don't. That was me dropping the Rey head on the floor as I was examining it while I was talking. But I think that's a really great part use in this MOC here and something you could do yourself very easily. Great color scheme on this MOC too. This red, yellow, and white with little bits of black and sort of gunmetal silver thrown in there. It kind of gives it this funky sort of machinery sci-fi drone look to it. It just sort of screams science fiction and very much screams cyberpunk. It's just fantastic. I love too that this MOC uses one of the old hockey torso from some of the older construction hockey sets that came out ages ago. There were some more obscure sets for sure, but they had some cool pieces in them that you could definitely easily translate to Bionicle. For example, they had a few Nuva shoulders in some funky different colors, and this really cool torso piece here, which I think actually really lends itself to a to that cyberpunk aesthetic. It does have this slight futuristic look to it, depending on the way and the context you use the parts in that. So it's pretty cool. But overall, yeah, this is a fantastic model. I think really captures that cyberpunk look. Really, really well done. Let's move on to the next mock here, which is by Marco, and this is called Octagon Industries Multi-Environmental Transportation System. What I love so much about this is that this mock has this fantastic mix of a very didn't want to say that word properly there. A very greeble-heavy design, so it's got a lot of those mechanical details thrown in there, but it also has a very nice mix of smoother, refined textures to it, which is a lot of those white elements on this mock. There's really kind of strong, refined angles in all the white elements on this. You see it very specifically in the legs, this very long line, and these kind of accentuated elements, sort of longer legs, a bit of a hunch to the mock to some degree, and a sort of smaller, funky-looking head. You know, it looks very different to sort of mechanical, robotic things that you would see in society today. And of course, Cyberpunk is a sort of representation of the near but distant future. So in that sense, it looks very alien to our world, looks very futuristic. But also the contrasting textures also really work with the general look and feel of Cyberpunk, which is meant to be that juxtaposition of old and new. And so having a little bit of smooth textures, a little bit of the more greebled mechanical textures, and throwing it together, I think is really smart, because it instantly ties it back to what it's supposed to be with this cyberpunk genre. So if you're building something in Cyberpunk, it might be a really good idea to play around with contrasting elements, whether that's contrasting textures or a few other things. I'll talk about that in even more depth as we continue talking about mocks in this episode. But I think that's just really clever to do that, to play with those contrasting textures. And heck, that works with other things. Maybe you're not building a Cyberpunk mock. Nothing wrong with having a healthy balance of two contrasting textures. If you've kind of got your ratio right, it can always, work really well, and I think this is a great example of that. I also like this little Technic figure guy that's next to this funky robot here. Essentially, it is just one of the Technic figures that you got in some of the older Technic Lego sets. It was something they didn't really put in any more recent sets, because Lego didn't really want to constrict themselves to any form of scale with Technic sets, and so they said, hey, we don't really need Technic figures anymore, which is unfortunate, because they were really cool. But he's essentially taken the head out of a Technic figure, added a few more things onto it, and then put this really cool robotic head on top, which honestly is a very clever way of achieving that cyberpunk look, because it's just a subtle change, but it does a lot for it. Kind of looks like the Nile that we're getting in the new High Republic era of Star Wars, but it didn't relate at all. I just wanted to throw in a Star Wars reference, as I always seem to do. But it looks awesome. It's a very subtle way of doing that, and a great little way of adding a little counterpart to some sort of machine or design that you might be making if you want to change up the scale and not play around with the scale of a typical sort of a Nika build or a Hero Factory build or something. It works well. And it's just a really cool head design as well. Actually, now that I look at it in a bit more detail, it looks like he's actually taken the torso out as well and built his own custom torso. That's actually pretty clever too. Great way of playing with a Technic figure. Nicely done. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Ögonblick, and this is called Kiirus, Ögonblick, and the Carp Speeder. So first off, it's a fish speeder. That's so clever. I love that. Obviously, I don't imagine it is an actual fish. It's just designed to look like a fish. But I love that. I love how there's sort of the whiskers at the front there and just a subtle little mouth at the front. It's a great way of making it look like the speeder is designed to look like a koi, but is not actually, in fact, a fish, And that's really clever. Or a carp, whatever. And also a great idea to give your mock a speeder. Maybe you've built this great humanoid character and you're like, it's missing something. What's it missing? Maybe it needs a sick speeder like this, whether you build it with a lot of system parts or you build it with some Bionicle parts. Never a hard thing to do, You look at a lot of the Technic sets, you got some cool Technic motorbikes or helicopters and things. There's no reason you couldn't build a Bionicle and put it inside, and now your Bionicle has has a bike or has a helicopter or something. That could be pretty cool. Might be a fun challenge to build. What I like so much about this mock is there's really out there strong colors. Limes, yellows, oranges, sort of like medium blues and things, and just very strong, vibrant colors that are partnered together. I think there's definitely elements of Cyberpunk in those really bright, strong colors, which is awesome. So really great job of playing with so many different colors and doing such clever color blocking as well, so that it doesn't just become this kind of rainbow of a mock that you might see on some of your earlier creations in your early mocking career, when we were all a bit younger and we would build very rainbow-focused mocks. Of course, nothing wrong with those, but if you want to take your mocking to the next level, it's always good to start color blocking and to strip back some of those colors and base your color schemes off what it would actually look like. This is a really good example of really, really playing with color. It's very well done. it's difficult to do, you know, and Ao's done it perfectly. So taking a look at just the figure, so not the speeder now, one thing I love so much about this character, you know, there's all sorts of times I will put system-focused mocks in the Bionicle Inspiration series. I don't always get comments about it, but sometimes I do get people saying, hey, this is the Bionicle Inspiration series. Why is there a system mock in this? I'm like, because there's so much you can learn from a system mock. And let me go into a bit more detail as to why, because this one specifically you can learn quite a lot. So let's look at this hair design. Using all these tail pieces to form this very, very long strand of hair. That's awesome, and there's no reason you couldn't do something like that on a Bionicle mock, especially even using those pieces, because, well, they already have connections for a bunch of Technic and Bionicle parts. It's a really nice hair design, and it would work super well on so many Bionicles, so there's one thing for sure. Let's take a look at their elbows. You can see that this mock has used some of the 1x2 rounded plate pieces. They're a bit more of a newer piece, but they're sick. One of my favorite pieces. And because they kind of naturally have that lightsaber hole going through them, you can use them to put some T-bars or a few other things on them, like AO has done here. And suddenly it's a great way to get a little bit of posability going on there. Just a great way of attaching the upper and lower arm together. Really, really cool. Also using some skeleton arm pieces there in tan, which that came in a Ninjago set. A couple Ninjago sets, I believe, actually. Using that for fingers. Great design. And also the fact that they're in tan, you can kind of play around with some flesh elements and stuff. That's awesome. Great brick-built head. You could easily apply that onto a Bionicle in some fashion. And then a really nice part use here, putting these aeroplane fin pieces here that we can see on the jacket. Those sort of look like kind of like a bit of a, I don't know, just the edges of a jacket. It's a really nice design and a really nice part use. Again, easily could put that on a Bionicle. And some cone pieces here to kind of form where the thigh sort of flows into the knee. Great idea. And again, could easily do that on a Bionicle. See, yeah, it's a system-heavy mock, but there's lots of little things on here that you could very easily apply to a Bonkle yourself. So never forget to study those system mocks, because there's lots we can learn. Nice work. Really, really cool mock. Next one. This is by Gamma Bomb, and this is called Master and Slave. So this mock uses Scala, which is another super old Lego theme. It was kind of like Barbie, kind of like doll, more of a female-focused Lego theme from the past there. Kind of to some degree a predecessor to Belleville and Friends and things. It was a really cool theme with some really, really sick parts. But yes, it came with more sort of Barbie-like dolls. And we see this one character here, which is very similar to that little Technic figure we saw before with this awesome-looking robot head here. And yes, the Scala body as well. So hey, if you're lucky enough to have any Scala sets, well, heck, maybe you want to pick up a Barbie and add some Lego on top of it. Why not? You can create something really, really unique and really cool. And again, really nice contrast here with more mechanical details and a human body like this, which he's wrapped some tires around. He's put some helmet pieces on the kneecaps and stuff. All sorts of craziness. Really, really clever use of parts and a really great way of playing around with a really obscure Lego piece of a Scala doll. That's awesome. Speaking of obscure Scala stuff, I'm going out on a hunch here, I don't know for sure, but the sort of like salmon-coloured piece here that forms the head of this almost like dog-like creature behind the Scala guy here, I believe that's a Scala briefcase, which is awesome. And hey, it makes a really great head design on this interesting creature here. And I love that. Weird, funky, unique head design. You could have built this whole interesting apparatus with eyes and teeth and stuff, or you could just put a briefcase on it because it's a robot and why not? And there's something very cyberpunk about that, in my opinion, there. I think that's awesome to see. Love it. Love it a lot. Another thing I love too, again, those contrasting textures on this mock here. We see lots of old grey and new grey pieces in here, forming this greebled mechanical looking texture. And that's beautifully contrast with these very smooth, refined, white sort of shells on top of it. Automatically kind of screaming this sort of drone cyberpunk look. It's great. And I love kind of the gaps in this design too, like the sort of middle of this mock here, kind of having this black gap with these pistons linking it together. That looks great. That's really clever. But also some of these holes here, just these Technic brick pieces with these hole connections in here, just deliberately putting that in there. I think that's really cool. Just an interesting looking kind of texture that's throughout the mock, and there's something more mechanical and science fiction-y about that. It's just cool to see. So little stuff going on here, and some very clever, very outside-the-box designs here. Not your average mock that you'd see every day, but it's just fantastic. Gambit Bomb knows what he's doing. Now let's move on to the next one. This is by Nobu Terry, and it's simply just called Cyberpunk. So this mock also uses one of the Star Wars Ultra Build headpieces, and it does it in a really, really cool way. Again, I was saying before, the Poe Dameron head, I know what it is, man. But, like, if you ever look at some of the Star Wars Black Series figurines, if you look at the Poe Dameron one, they did a terrible job at sculpting that face. I don't know what it is, but there just doesn't seem to be a lot of success with sculpting Poe Dameron's head, unfortunately. And to some degree, LEGO kind of did the same. It just doesn't look like Oscar Isaac. It's nowhere near as beautiful as his, you know? But hey, it is what it is, you know? But I actually think that can work in your favor here, because this head looks a lot less like Poe Dameron and instead starts to kind of blur the line between it being Star Wars or it being a random cyberpunk thing. And I also like that he's specifically playing with this, because a lot of the painting and different designs on this Resistance pilot helmet here, sure, it's very Star Wars-y, but to some degree it can also kind of fit in with the cyberpunk aesthetic, you know? It kind of works. And especially I like the angle that he's done in this photograph here, kind of just angling it down slightly so you can't quite see the face front on, so you're kind of obscuring it slightly, so it does sort of help to differentiate it from Star Wars, which is great. So I think it's a great use of that head there, and a really nice use of the colors and the printing that's on that piece, and using that to help you reflect a theme. It's great. This is also a bit more of a monochromatic look at Cyberpunk. You know, we've seen some very brightly colored examples before, but this one, yeah, it's just black and gunmetal, a little few other things thrown in here and there, of course, but it works, you know. It's cool. So nice work, Nobu Terry. Next one. This is by Kevin H, and this is called Experiment 058. So this uses Galador very, very well. It's using some pieces from Nick Bluetooth, one of the signature Galador characters, as it were. A great example of using Galador very well, and a great example too of using some of the more difficult pieces to use in Galador that are very clearly just a dude in a t-shirt, you know, whereas some of the other Galador pieces can more effectively fit in with pre-existing other parts. You know, they have a specific fur texture, so you combine it with some other sort of more fur-textured Bionicle or Ben 10 pieces or something, or, you know, all the other examples. Whereas this one's a little bit harder to use, but you're actually, again, relating it back to Cyberpunk, a more sort of realistic human-like look, and then contrasting it with technology and other sort of more mechanical details, which contrast, like we were saying, I think is very key in Cyberpunk. And I also think that's something else that's clever. So far, we've seen bits of Scala, I think we've seen bits of Belleville, you know, Clickets, Galador now, we've seen so many different LEGO themes, Scala, all sorts of stuff, being combined with CCBS, Bionicle, Technic, all sorts of stuff. Not only is it a great idea to contrast textures and aesthetics, but it's a great idea to contrast themes as well, because, especially some of those obscure themes, because those pieces just look weird, you know? If you were to hold them up to a random citizen who knows nothing about LEGO, they'd probably assume it wasn't a LEGO piece. You know, a lot of people didn't even know that Galador existed and have been AFOLs for years, you know? So I think that's also another great idea. If you have more obscure LEGO themes, or just kind of you want to play around with other LEGO themes, fitting that in with a cyberpunk aesthetic is a great idea, because like I said, contrast is key, I think, and it's a great way of doing it. And this mock is a beautiful example of that. You know, these robotic legs, this gun arm, these wires coming out of the body there, that sort of stuff shouldn't be on a human. Of course, they can be in a science fiction world, but in the real world, you don't really see that mix of man and machine, you know? It's just not something that happens, typically. Unless you're watching this video in 2074, and suddenly you're like, Ben, I just installed my robot arm yesterday. And I'd be like, look, man, I wasn't alive then. I didn't know. So yeah, who knows? But still, at the moment, that is very science fiction and cyberpunky. But maybe a few years from now, that'll just be the norm, man. And we're living in the cyberpunk. Who knows? Regardless, though, some beautiful stuff on this mock. Some great examples of contrast. Love your stuff. Next one. This is by Frog and is called Hercules Drone. This is a bit more of a system-focused example, but there's actually quite a fair bit of CCBS on it and Bionicle pieces thrown in there too. So a beautiful blend of everything. Love the little caution symbol, printed tiles up the top there. Playing around with little printed elements too. That's another great idea for some cyberpunk stuff. Helps it feel more lived in and more war-torn to some degree. It's just cool. More mechanical too, actually. This mock, of course, is a drone. Love a good drone. It's always very sci-fi and I think fits into with cyberpunk there. It's very nicely done. Also love, you know, this mock has a gun and a shield. It kind of looks like it might be some sort of security or police bot of some kind, you know. And especially too with the idea of cyberpunk being that more sort of downgraded society to some degree, it would make a lot of sense that a police force would have a bit of a stronger presence, as an example. So playing around with that, like security bots, police forces of some kind. I kind of got a little bit of that from Nobu Terry, his mock before with the Podamarin head on it. Kind of got a slight sort of security vibe from that. Playing around with that sort of kind of concept for a character, I think is actually a really good idea, definitely, and can fit in with the theme. I love too how this mock uses a lot of the Hero Factory shell pieces, because it does very much give it this aesthetic that this is a robot and there's sort of shells of armor being placed on top of the robotic details. I think just naturally a lot of CCBS armor can have that aesthetic to it, so it's a good piece to use for this theme. But additionally, the shoulder pads here that have those caution symbols in red and white on them there, they do have this sort of very strong, like, armored look. It's, again, like being placed on top of mechanical details. So it's cool to see that very beautifully flowing with those Hero Factory shell pieces there. So it's a great example of blending your system and your Bionicle together. It's cool. So yeah, nicely done. Last one here. This one is by Paddy Brick Splitter and is called Skate or Die. So this mock uses stickers really well. I think this is such a great example of why I never throw out my stickers and never actually put my stickers on a set when I build it, because I want to use those stickers on my mocks, man. I don't want to have to, strip them off a piece if I want to use it later down the line. And this is just a beautiful example of how all these different stickers on these pieces here does convey this cyberpunk look. So be sure to save your stickers and never forget, I do that with every single mock I build. I take out my drawer of stickers and I go, okay, can I put any of this on the mock? Would it improve it in some fashion? Sometimes the answer is no, but sometimes the answer is yeah. And putting on a sticker or two, or in this case, a whole bunch of stickers, can do a lot for it. So that's just a great idea and something to factor in for sure. And it works so well with Cyberpunk. It's good. Striking colors on this mock too. Blue, white, and a bit of magenta thrown in there. I think that's magenta. I'm always bad with my friends' colors, but that specific shade of pink there, very, very cool. And I think, again, kind of fits very well with Cyberpunk, a bit of a Cyberpunk color scheme, if you will. Again, this mock uses that ray head there. Works well. Always great to see some of those humanoid head pieces being used on a Bionicle. Of course, in this example, it's just the ray head. There's nothing to sort of cover it up in any way, but it still kind of works. So that's cool. So this mock also uses some prefab limb elements specifically on the lower legs here, just some white Anika leg pieces there. But that's cool. Nothing wrong with building a bit more of a simplistic mock that just sort of has little subtle things like the stickers and the color scheme that really convey cyberpunk. There's no reason you have to go ham bone and build this super complex, detailed, greebled, heavy mock like we saw earlier. No, you can just build your typical humanoid character with a more sort of CCBS focus to it. That works well, I think. I also love the stand too, especially with the name of this mock, Skate or Die. It does add a little bit more kind of context and story to the mock, which I think is really welcoming and really cool. So there you go. That is it for a bunch of cyberpunk-related Bionicle mocks. I hope you enjoyed. And hey, if you're planning on building a cyberpunk mock, well, please do, because that would be super rad. And hey, always cool to see a whole bunch more of them. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you did. And if you're thinking, hey, I'd love to see one of my mocks in the Bionicle Inspiration series, you can. You can do so through the email you're currently seeing on your screen. Send me over a few images, a description, or even just like one image and no description. It's completely up to you. There's no real set rules to what you specifically have to submit. I had someone send me a message the other day saying, hey, if I have illegal techniques in my mock, does that count? Of course, man, you can send whatever. There's no real restriction or kind of quality control or whatever. Just send it on through, and then eventually I'll put it on the show. But of course, I got a lot of submissions to work through, so your patience is key. Additionally, there'll be links in the description to all the mocks you saw in today's episodes. Be sure to check out those links and go give those guys a follow and see what other stuff they've made. They're talented builders. They deserve that love. And also, there'll be links to my social media in the description below as well. You can check all of that out there. Some other specific stuff that I've got going on that you can check out if you're interested. I will be doing probably about the time that this episode is posted. So if you're in pretty early when this episode is posted, I will be currently on a D&D stream called Minion Quest. It's on the Twitch account called Dead Aussie Gamer. You can check out a video that I released just before this one that gives you all the details on that there. But hey, if you want to see me play some Dungeons & Dragons, that's where you can see me do it. It'll be a lot of fun. Would love to see you there if you can join in. And actually, speaking of Dungeons & Dragons, it's another video. I had a few more information about it over on that one if you want to go check that out. But I'll give you the quick rundown now. I'm also part of a service. It is a paid service, actually, but it is a service that allows you to play Dungeons & Dragons with me and a few other friends of mine, some very talented dungeon masters who have been playing D&D for years, and they're sort of hiring out their services there, and I'm doing a lot of the sort of social media and graphic designy stuff for them, but I'm actually a part of the service as well, and you can play a game with me if that's something that you'd be interested in doing. If you want, check the links in the description. There's more information about that there. Head over to the Flame Tongue Fable social media, and you can check out more information about that over there. But anyway, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed. Build some Cyberpunk MOCs. See you in the next episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. Bye for now, guys.